For my first tournament, I went in with very low expectations. I predicted that I'd go 0 for 3, but at the very least I'd learn something or get a better understanding of the game, and also have some fun taking a very fluffy Screaming Ravens list into the competitive scene. I did not expect to actually win a game, let alone get a positive win rate, and yet that is exactly what happened. This video will go through each of my games to explain what happened and how I managed to pull off such a monumental 40k achievement with 12 Centurions, a Storm Raven, and a Dream. I know that this channel is called Paul is bad at stuff, but there's no need to panic. This channel is still correctly named. Whilst I did go 2 wins, 1 loss, out of all the people who did get a 2 on record, I still managed to do the worst. So even in victory, I could still find a way to be bad. I actually thought my list was fairly good, but I had no idea if that was actually the case or if I just massively overvalued Centurions. I was worried that I'd just play against opponents who knew exactly what they were doing and would expose all of the Centurions' weaknesses and show me why they aren't actually ever taken in any reasonable list. I also know that standard Space Marines right now aren't very good. I find Vanguard Spearhead an awesome detachment with a lot of cool tricks and also fits into the Screaming Ravens theme, which is a nice bonus. So first let's go through my list and talk about each element, how I wanted to play each unit and how they'd fit into my overall game plan, which is totally a thing I had and I wasn't just making stuff up on the fly in a wild display of complete madness. My Warlord was Kaven Shrike, which immediately ruins the fact that this is a Screaming Raven detachment by taking the Raven Guard Chapter Master, but Kaven Shrike is really, really good. Kaven Shrike would be attached to 10 Vanguard veterans, each with Inferno pistols. I took Inferno pistols here over Storm Shields for Vanguard vets because Inferno pistols are cool. And if this unit is played right, they aren't really going to be threatened by damage. Kaven's big ability is Shadow Masters, which means that the unit he is leading cannot be attacked by range attacks unless they're within 12 inches. And they wouldn't be able to be attacked by melee attacks because you can't attack in melee from range, so I don't know why they specify. But this basically means that Kaven and those 10 Vanguard veterans are completely safe to come down with Rapid Ingress, which I did basically every single game. You can Rapid Ingress on your opponent's turn just over 12 inches away, and they cannot do anything about it because they're not in range to shoot. Then on your turn, you don't have to bring them down the reinforcement steps. They're ready to move. They have a 12-inch move, so they can get right into the face of where you want them to be with Inferno pistols and then charge unfailably and start ripping things to shred with their 40 attacks, with lethal hits as well. The second ability of Kaven Shrike, which is Echoes of the Raven Spire, means that on your opponent's turn, if you're not within engagement range of any enemies, you can go back into strategic reserves and then do it again. Unfortunately, this part of his abilities did not really come up in any of my games for various reasons which we'll get into. Joining Kaven Shrike and the boys was a single jump captain with the Thunderhammer and Storm Shield. He was given the Ghost Weave Cloak to give him stealth and lone operative, so very similar to Kaven Shrike but on his own. He did a lot of objective stuff for me, a lot of actions, but he's quite expensive. It's 100 points for this. Whilst I've had mixed success with this lone operative, he was basically the reason I won the third game. So when he works amazingly well. My third character was a Phobos Lieutenant who usually went around with 5 Incursors. Very nice just to be able to get that move, shoot, move, especially with the assault that you get with Incursors. And lethal hits is quite nice, although that didn't really come up much. I have another 5 Incursors who are just there to do actions or hold my home objective. I'd have loved these to be Infiltrators, but when they nerfed the Storm Raven got 20 points more expensive, which meant I had to take the Infiltrators down to Incursors to go from 100 points to 80. Slightly annoying, but not the worst thing in the world. My final character is this Tech Marine. You know how I feel about this Tech Marine.
Nice fucking model!
His job was to buff something at the start of the game. If I go first, it's usually the Storm Raven. Otherwise, he's just taking his pet Redemptor for a walk. I also have a Storm Raven, which is just a very expensive transport for what it does, but it does allow me to get a Brutalis and 3 Melter Centurions right into the face of the enemy, unless I find it completely impossible to hide this bloody thing behind any terrain because it's so bloody big, in which case it just gets killed turn 1 and doesn't really do anything. It's got pretty decent weapons as well, quite a varied selection to take out both anti-tank and anti-horde stuff, so I do quite like it. It's just a little bit too expensive, not being that tanky. Alongside the Brutalis with Melters and my Melter Assault Centurions with Melters, and another 3 Assault Centurions with Flamers. These usually started on the board just as either a counterpunch if something got close, or just to basically slowly walk up and down smash something. And finally, I have what I consider to be the linchpin of the army. 6 Devastator Centurions with twin-linked las cannons. I cannot emphasize how amazing this unit is, especially in Vanguard Spearhead. So you're already getting -1 to hit and cover if you're over 12 inches away, which is where you want to be. You can use Guerrilla Tactics to pick them up off the board at the end of your opponent's turn and place them somewhere else, which is incredible because you just need to find a line of sight and then shoot whatever you want. You can use Strike from the Shadows to give them +1 to hit and +1 AP for being over 12 inches away, which is where you want to be. And Devastating Centurions innately reroll 1s to hit, or reroll everything if you find against something on an objective marker. But with a +1 to hit, you're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s. You don't even need Oath of Moment, which can go somewhere else. So you're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and then Twin Link Las Cannons are rerolling their wounds. You've got Centurial missile launchers, which are just great at clearing hordes. These things are amazing, and basically, if they start to die, that's when I start to lose. And my game plan really revolves around that. Basically, just having the Devastating Centurions at the back, trying to take out big targets, and then everything else going forward to try and get into range to Melter and to Stormraven and to Brutalis things to death. I feel at the moment in 10th edition, there's a lot of monsters and vehicles, so trying to get those Assault Centurions into melee with them is really, really good. Sustained hits 2 on Twin Link Strength 10, damage 3 melee weapons is amazing. And also very, very cool just in general, and very Screaming Raven. But one of the main problems with this list is just lack of things to really do objectives. It's a very low model count and not a whole lot of OC, meaning that if I fall behind the tempo, that's kind of it. There's not really a way I can come back by doing objectives because I don't really have much that can do objectives, and Centurions are slow. My first opponent was Tom, super friendly guy who had bought a Imperial Guard army with 2 Dawns. As you can see here from his list, 2 Dawns, a tank commander, and then quite a lot of infantry with 6 Chimeras. The Kasrkin went into Treaty Reserves with 1 Chimera, and basically the Cadian Shock Troopers and the Heavy Weapon Squads filled the other Chimeras. This was the terrain layout with a Hammer and Anvil deployment zone, and the primary mission was Scorched Earth, which is the one we had to burn objective markers for extra points. But obviously that means they're no longer on the board. The mission rule was basically worthless for me because I don't have any battle line, but Tom has a lot of battle line, so it was actually really good for him if he can get onto those objectives. Having a lot of transports means I actually have to put effort into breaking those apart to get into that gooey guardsman center. So a lot of my anti-infantry really wasn't doing much until I broke those apart. The issue that Tom had is that the actual terrain really did not work in his favor on this board. Tabletop Tactics has a lot of really cool, immersive terrain, which means there's not just all like L-shaped ruins and stuff, which means these blocks here in our deployment zones, you cannot walk through and have to go round. This means rather than being able to surge a lot of his stuff forward, there are basically then 2 funnels that you have to go down to get anywhere. With all of the Dawns and the tank commander on 1, the only other place to really go was around this corner here, straight down the line into where my Devastating Centurions were. I got the first turn, managed to get the Stormraven up a bit, drop out my cargo to try and get something in later. The Stormraven managed to be safe from at least one of the Dawns, and his Sentinels that came forward, plus the tank commander and the 1 Dawn that could see, couldn't quite take out my Stormraven, which meant I was in a very good position to start walking up my Melter Centurions and my Brutalis right into them and get a lot of movement and basically secure the midboard with a lot of tanky stuff. And because of the terrain, he couldn't really get stuff out to get angles on these things. He got some of his Cadians and heavy weapon squads on top of this building here, but by that point, I was in a position with my other Assault Centurions to flamer and bolter them to death, which meant I had these 2 objectives pretty secure. Tom could try and get the other objective on the other side of the map, but every time he was bringing a Chimera around, it would just get popped by my Devastating Centurions, and whilst he did manage to get some stuff onto the board, that's when I rapid ingressed the Caven unit, and they basically were able to just jump right on top of them, rip them apart, and secure that objective because nothing else could get in their range, so they were perfectly safe from all of his stuff. Towards the end, that meant I could then jump my Devastating Centurions from where they were right into his backline and just rip the rest of his tanks to shred. I didn't manage to kill any Dawns, unfortunately. In the end, that terrain layout and having some poor dice on his part meant that I could just secure my position in the midboard, push any sort of attack from him, and just run away with the victory. His Kasrkin did manage to get into the backline towards the end, but they only really took out my backline and cursors, which really weren't doing much at that point. A decisive round 1 victory, and just in time for lunch. So I guess the question here is, if 2 Dawns are not enough to take down the Screaming Ravens, what about 3 Dawns? Would that be enough? Yes. My second opponent was Archie. Again, really nice guy, very friendly, but this time a list with 3 Rogel Dawns, and a lot more tanks to back it up. Just the 1 Chimera this time, but 2 Leman Russ Exterminators, 3 Rogel Dawns, and the tank commander. This is a very, very scary list. This list really shows what happens if I don't have enough to start taking out those threats, because I will slowly be whittled down, and then I'll have nothing to fight back. This terrain was a lot more standard, with more open terrain and ruins that you fire around, but that openness of terrain meant that my deployment wasn't very good, especially with the deployment zone we had. I overextended again again. I tried to push too close to the edge of my deployment zone, which meant the Storm Raven was out of position and he got an angle on it, which managed to destroy it. Especially with all of these things from like the Scout Sentinels and his mortars that added loads and loads of bonuses to take it out pretty well. I pushed all my stuff up this far when I could have really just had the Storm Raven be held back a bit, out of the range of some of his shorter ranged guns, and then I could have used that as a counter charge. This is also a weird mission. I don't really understand this one, but the other problem I had is, as Archie went first, is Scout Sentinels could really take these two corners here, and I was hemmed in immediately. The Gaunt's Ghost I was also quite scared about because they have that precision sniper that could really rip me apart, but I did manage to successfully deal with those with the Shrike Bomb, which also took out a Sentinel. The problem is then it kind of just stuck in front of a bunch of tanks, which had moved up the board and blocked the mid board, and I couldn't really make any progress. This was a very scary lot of tank list, and really it showed the weaknesses of my list. If I don't get that either first turn or get a good start to secure the mid board, I just get hemmed in and I don't have enough stuff to really fight it. And none of the tricks that you really get in Vanguard Spearhead were really helping here. We'll say the one bonus I do have from this game is the fact that even though I lost, I definitely put the fear of God into Archie because of the Centurions. He was extremely worried and definitely wanted to take out those Devastated Centurions as soon as possible. And every time that my Assault Centurions did what they do best and punched something to death, he was very, very adamant about taking them down too, which he unfortunately did. But at least I made him fear the Centurions. And that helps me feel good about myself for really, really liking Centurions because they are actually really, really good. Archie was definitely a really good player and even helped me with my Cave and Shrike Bomb because I was trying to get into both the Scout Sentinel and the Gaunt's Ghost. He gave some tips about how to actually kind of maneuver them and then pile in such a way that would work to be able to take them both out. So really, really nice of him to help explain how that worked and give you those tips to actually help defeat him. And definitely the kind of attitude you should be having when you go into a tournament is helping your opponent when they are struggling or, you know, that you know what they can do, but they can't quite do it. Definitely one of the bonuses of going to a tournament like this. After a brief break, it was my final opponent, Chris. It was a really nice guy, great opponent, and if you thought 2 Dawns was bad and then 3 Dawns was worse, how about 4 Catan? To see from his list, it's all Catan. All 3 of the Catan shards are Transcendent Catan. He had an Overlord of Plasmancer with some Immortals for a really scary critical hit bomb. He had a Locust Lord with some Locust Destroyers, a Doomsday Arc, which is also horrifying, and 3 Tomb Blades, which were there just to do some scout moves. Similar to the first game, a lot of the terrain wasn't able to be moved through, so it was stuff you had to go round, but it wasn't as dense, so there was a lot more angles you could come from. The mission rule was fairly inconsequential. It was Fog of War, which doesn't really matter for me and didn't really come up too much. But the primary mission was Unexploded Ordnance, which is definitely an interesting one. It's the weird one where you have to move objectives towards your opponent's deployment zone, and our deployment zone was this Pariah Nexus jagged one, which I don't really like, but it was fine. I managed to get the first turn and actually got a really good angle on one of his Catan shards with my 6 Devastator Centurions, which nicely brings me on to the fact that Catans are terrifying. So they are 12 wounds, toughness 11, and a 4-up invuln. They also have a 4-up armor save, which means AP is basically nothing to them. They also have a Feel No Pain of 5+, which means that any damage that goes through, they get to potentially not take. And they halve all damage against them. And they get Reanimation Protocols, which means they heal D3 at the start of their turn. So my buffed up Devastator Centurions with 6 Lance Cannons, hitting on 3s because of stealth, re-rolling everything actually, because it was my at the moment target, re-rolling all of the 3-ups to wound, D6 plus 1 damage at the start of his turn. That Catan shard took 1 wound. And there are 4 of them. And then he moved his Doomsday Arc, which I didn't realize, and probably should have found out, has a damage 4 weapon. One of the advantages of Centurions is they are 4 wounds, which is kind of a weird wound number. A lot of things get damage 3 or D3, so having that extra wound, that 4th wound, is really nice to prevent things from killing you quite quickly. Except the Doomsday Arc has damage 4 and ripped 3 of them to shreds. Fortunately, in the next turn, I managed to get it back pretty quick with the 3 remaining Devastator Centurions, so even at half strength, those Devastator Centurions are incredible. So at least it wasn't threatening me anymore. I also got the Storm Raven up onto this piece of terrain here, disembarked my Brutalis, so in turn 2, he could essentially elbow drop from the top rope directly onto his Tomb Blades. A combination of my Redemptors, the Storm Raven, and eventually Brutalis, who charged in, ripped his Locust Destroyers to shreds, leaving just the Catans over there. And his 10 Immortal Tesla thing, I managed to rapid ingress again with the Caven Bomb, and they completely pulled them apart, which meant he was only left with his 4 Catan shards, of which I think at the end of the game, I managed to at least kill 1. The secret to killing them, by the way, is actually weight of dice, not big hits. You can't halve 1 damage weapons. So my Stormraven with its 24 Hurricane Bolter shots actually managed to do 6 wounds to the Transcendent Catan. If I had actually got my Kaven Bomb to move over there, lethal hits with 40 attacks probably would have taken a Catan out. Because AP doesn't really matter, so as long as you're making them do a lot of single damage saves, they can't halve it, and then eventually they will fall over. Or at least in this case, one of them will. Because you have to do a lot of actions to move the objectives towards your opponent's deployment zone, after I took most of his army out and only left him with the Catans, there wasn't much he could really do in terms of actions. And whilst he slowly whittled away the rest of my army, my Brutalis was in combat with 2 of his Catan shards for like 3 rounds. And my Devastator Centurions in melee held up the Nightbringer, which meant that my solo jump back captain could come down, jump onto that objective and start moving it forward. Eventually as well, the Void Dragon managed to kill my Stormraven and start moving the center objective towards my deployment zone. And I wanted to really get my Kaven Bomb in to help my Brutalis, but my secondary cards, every time they came up, were basically perfect for me. A combination of Kaven and my solo jump captain got Extend Battle Lines, Establish Locust, and Sabotage, all in good places for lots and lots of victory points. And after all that, trying to calculate all of those things, the score was 37 to 35. Extremely close. And also wrong. That's not actually what the score was. See, we actually both made the same mistake because we both miscalculated how the primary mission actually worked. If you don't move any objectives, you still get points. The center objective and the ones closest to your deployment zone still give you some points. They give you 2 for each of those. So basically, if you do nothing and leave all of the objectives in a status quo, you should get at least 4 victory points per round, which we didn't calculate. We also miscalculated how close the center objective marker was to the starting deployment zone, which meant when his Void Dragon was moving that center objective, it was actually getting him more points than we thought. So this is what the primary score should actually look like. And in the end, he did get 2 more points than me on the primary, meaning that this score should have been 49 to 49, which is a draw. I then realized I hadn't actually put Sabotage into the app, so I was missing 6 victory points. So actually, originally the score should have been 43 to 35, and then it now should be 51 to 45. But I think we both really enjoyed this game because it was so close. When I confirmed that he had 35, I said I had 37. Immediate handshake, we were both like, that was a great game. And that was probably my favorite game of the tournament. Firstly, because I wasn't playing against Imperial Guard again and again. And also, just because it was such an interesting list versus another fairly unique and weird list. And the minuscule tactical decisions to try and move the objective, try and get those perfect things, the card draws that we both got, meant that the game was so close throughout the entire thing. And there were just a lot of bits which were just absolute cinema. My Brutalis top rope jumping onto the Tomb Blades, my Devastator Centurions firing everything and doing nothing, and also highlighted a key mistake I kept making because of the game time being so short. I would sometimes have one of his Locust Destroyers on 1 wound and then fire a big shot at it rather than my small shot to try and plink that 1 last damage off, so I would sometimes waste a Melter shot or a Las Cannon shot or something. Fortunately, inconsequential, but still something I do need to make sure I'm not missing in a tournament environment where the games are much faster paced than I'm used to. So overall, a very scrappy 2-1 result, which I'm very happy with. I felt like the list worked really well, and all of the units worked exactly how I thought they would. The Kaven Bomb, because I'm not playing against Knights constantly in my practice games, thanks Steve, got to really shine, and a couple of my opponents were actually quite complimentary of that tactic. They didn't really expect it, and the fact that I could rapid ingress on their turn and they could do nothing about it really made them have to think about what they wanted to do. It wasn't something I gotcha'd them with. I explained at the start of the game that that was something I could do and probably would do. And whilst they were trying to, you know, screen stuff out, I think in the case of Chris's Necrons, there just wasn't enough stuff to really zone everything out. And in Tom's case, I didn't even need to go onto his side of the board. I could just park them behind my Devastator Centurions and take the mid board by ripping apart all of that infantry. I actually have an idea of how to improve this list, and it actually involves even more Centurions, but also a bunch of other stuff I need to buy, and at the moment I really don't need to buy any more stuff. I have such a massive backlog, and I want to focus on other things like the Skaven type box I bought ages ago, and Gunpla, because people keep reminding me that I still need to make another Gunpla video. But eventually, at an outing to another tournament, I might try and bring the buffed up Screaming Raven list, which means unfortunately leaving the Stormraven and the Dreadnoughts at home, which are some of my favorite models. But it also means that I have to bring the Tech Marine, which means Steve doesn't get to be smug anymore. Let me know your thoughts. What did you think of my list? Do you think I did well? Do you think I just managed to scrape by with pure luck? Or do you think there is actually a use for Centurions in the competitive scene? Am I trailblazing the meta with the Screaming Ravens and the Vanguard Spearhead with many Centurions? Probably not, because 6 Centurions with Uriel in Vanguard Spearhead was already a thing that was used, but they didn't bring 6 Assault Centurions, so Clearly, I'm better. Leave your comments below, and thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this, go like, subscribe, all the good useful stuff. And if you really enjoy this, become a member, like these fine folk. I'm going to point at a random one by drawing just a point in a random direction and see which one it points at. You! Thank you specifically. But thank you to all of the people who have supported me to help secure the future of this channel, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.